somewhere in what is now northern Israel, close to 800,000 years ago, a person lifts a piece of fish off the hot coals and takes a bite. The smell hit them first. Then the warmth. The flesh pulled away from the bone with almost no effort. Soft and rich and easy to eat. Nothing about this moment felt special to them. It was just dinner. The way dinner had been for as long as anyone could remember. Everything about that meal is gone now. The person is gone. The fire is gone. The fish, the smell, the warmth, all of it erased by 800,000 years. Everything vanished except one thing, a piece of tooth enamel smaller than a grain of rice. And that little piece of tooth knows something the person who cooked the fish never did. It knows the fire had just done something invisible. The heat had killed things inside that fish, far too small for any eye to catch, that could have made a person sick. The cook never saw it happen. Nobody would see it happen for another 800,000 years. So here is the strange part. The title asks how ancient humans discovered that fire made food safer. But that question assumes there was a moment, one person, one flash of insight. The truth is stranger than that. How does a whole species learn that something is protecting them when the thing trying to kill them is invisible? To answer that, we have to start with the tooth, and with a fact that trips people up the first time they hear it. Humans were cooking their food long before they had the faintest idea why they should. The site is called Gesher Beno Yaakov, on the bank of an old river valley in Israel. When researchers dug into it, they pulled out something you would not expect from a place that old. More than 40,000 pieces of fish. Now, fish bones are fragile. Most of them are long gone, dissolved into the mud over the centuries. But the teeth survived. Fish carry hard, little grinding teeth in their throats. And those teeth are tough. They lasted. And when scientists looked closely at the enamel on those teeth, they found something written into the crystal structure, a signature left behind by heat. Here is what made it interesting. The teeth had not been burned to a crisp. They showed the marks of a lower, gentler heat, something under about 500 degrees Celsius. And that number is the first clue. A fish that falls into a raging fire gets scorched black and cracked apart. These teeth told a calmer story. But the temperature alone does not close the case. And this is where the real detective work comes in. The researchers looked at everything around those teeth. Which fish were there, and which parts where the teeth sat in the ground, clustered near the old hearths. The way certain species showed up again and again put all of that together. The gentle heat, the location, the pattern of what got eaten and what got left. And one answer fits far better than the rest. Somebody was cooking these fish on purpose, holding them at a careful heat, not just tossing them into flames. That is why this spot matters so much. It gives us the earliest clear evidence of cooking that we have found anywhere on Earth. Not the first meal ever cooked. We will never find that one. Just the oldest one we can still prove. Sitting there in the enamel of a fish that somebody ate close to 800,000 years ago. And this is the moment to be honest about that word in the title. Discover. It makes you picture a scene. One clever person, one lucky night, a sudden bright idea. Archaeology does not find that scene. It never has. We cannot dig up the first human who understood why cooked food was better, because an idea does not fossilize. What we can dig up is the habit, and a habit is a very different thing from a discovery. By the time these fish were cooked, whatever insight started, the whole practice was already old news. Somebody at this river knew enough to pick the right fish, build the right fire, hold it at the right heat, and do it again and again. That is not a first attempt. That is a routine. So the tooth proves they did it. That much is solid. What the tooth cannot tell us is what they understood while they did it. Did they know the heat was protecting them? Did they have any sense at all of the invisible thing the fire was killing? Almost certainly not. And that gap, the space between what these people were doing and what they could possibly have known, is the whole story. Everything from here on lives inside it. Before we can cross that gap, though, we have to clear up a much bigger misunderstanding. Because the way most of us picture the discovery of cooking is wrong from the very first step. Picture the version of this story you probably grew up with. A caveman stands near a fire. He tosses a hunk of raw meat into the flames, waits a bit, pulls it out, takes a bite, and his eyes go wide. Cooking is invented. Roll credits. It is a great little scene. It is also almost nothing like what really happened. The real story is slower. And honestly, a lot stranger. Because using fire and cooking with fire are two completely different skills. And a huge stretch of time sits between them. Fire had to be mastered in stages. And there are 4 of them. Each one is a whole world apart from the next. The first stage is meeting fire. Wildfire has rolled across this planet for hundreds of millions of years. Long before anything human walked around, lightning starts it. Dry grass feeds it. Our early ancestors did not invent that fire. They ran into it. And at some point, instead of only running away like every other animal, some of them started paying attention. A burned patch of land after a grass fire is a buffet. Roasted seeds, cooked roots, animals that did not escape. You did not need to understand fire to grab a free meal it left behind. The second stage is keeping it. This is a giant leap. Meeting a wildfire is luck. Holding onto a flame, feeding it, carrying it, keeping it alive through the night and the rain and the wind. That takes work and planning and real knowledge. A group that could keep a fire going had heat and light whenever they wanted, as long as somebody never let it die. But notice what they still could not do. If that flame went out, they were back to waiting on the next lightning strike. They were guarding a fire they could not replace. The third stage is controlling it. Not just having a flame, but bending it to your will. Moving food closer or farther. Judging how long to leave it. Reading the heat by feel. This is where fire slowly turns into a tool instead of a force. And this is the stage those cooked fish in Israel are showing us. That careful, lower heat. That means somebody was running the flame instead of the other way around. The fourth stage is creating fire from scratch. Whenever you want. No lightning required. This is the one that finally cut humans loose from luck. And here is the fact that stops people cold. This last stage came very, very late. The evidence for early fire use is genuinely ancient. At a cave called Wonderwerk in South Africa, there are traces of burned bone and ash that reach back close to 1,000,000 years. Humans and fire go deep. But the solid evidence for people actually making fire on demand shows up much later. Some of the clearest early proof we have for fire making comes from a site called Barnum in England at around 400,000 years ago. Think about the size of that gap. Something like 500,000 years may separate the moment humans started using fire from the moment they could reliably make it themselves. That is not a weekend project. Whole ways of life rose and vanished inside that stretch of time. And that gap changes everything about the question we are chasing. If it took our ancestors that long just to go from using fire to making it, then learning that fire made food safer, a benefit with no visible cause, was never going to be a single bright moment either. A truth that hidden only gets learned one way, slowly, across an immense span of time, through the same meal happening over and over and over. So the real question is not what humans figured out in one clever flash. It is why they kept coming back to that fire, meal after meal, year after year, long enough for a hidden pattern to surface at all. And the answer to that has nothing to do with safety. It has to do with something they could feel the very first time. Safety did not pull humans toward cooked food. Let us be clear about that. Nobody kept cooking because they worked out it was protecting them. They kept cooking because cooked food was better in ways they could taste and smell and feel on the spot. The safety was a gift riding along in secret, hidden inside all the rewards they actually noticed. And there were a lot of rewards they noticed. Start with the smell. When you heat food, the sugars and proteins in it start reacting and changing. And they throw off that deep, savory, roasted aroma. You already know this smell better than almost any other. It is seared steak. It is bread crust. It is coffee beans and roasted onions and bacon in a pan. That smell is not some side effect nobody cares about. Human noses are practically built to chase it. And it was calling to people hundreds of thousands of years ago, the same way it calls to you when you walk past a grill on a summer afternoon. Then there is texture. And this one is bigger than it sounds. Raw food fights back. It is tough. It is stringy. It takes real work to chew and break down. Heat does that work for you. It softens meat until it gives way easily. It loosens fish right off the bone. It turns hard, stubborn plants into something a person can actually get through. Cooking is almost like having part of the meal chewed for you before it ever reaches your mouth. There is the fat, running warm and rich out of the meat as it heats, carrying flavor and energy in every drop. There is taste itself, because heat can strip away some of the bitter, harsh edges that make certain raw foods unpleasant and leave something rounder and easier to enjoy. And there is the ease. This one is quietly huge. Think about who struggles most with tough. Raw food. The very young, the old, anyone with worn down teeth or a sore mouth. Soft, cooked food opens up meals to the people who could not manage them otherwise. In a small group living close to the edge, feeding your weakest members better is not a small thing. It can be the whole difference between a child growing up or not. But the deepest reward of all was one nobody at that fire could see, even while every one of them was living off it. Cooking pulls more usable energy out of the same food. Your body spends less effort breaking a cooked meal down, and it keeps more of what is inside Modern studies have actually measured this, and the boost is real. For a creature that was always walking the line between enough calories and not enough, that extra energy meant strength instead of weakness. It meant making it through a hard winter. They felt it as a full stomach. They felt it as having the energy to hunt again tomorrow. They never once thought of it as chemistry. So, look at everything fire was handing them. Better smell, softer texture, richer fat, cleaner taste, easier eating, more energy, all of it landing right away, right there at the meal, plain as day, and none of it is safety. That is the catch. This whole story circles around. Smell and softness and warm fat are wonderful, but they are not the invisible killer. The title is asking about the single most important thing fire did to their food. Had no smell. It had no taste. It made no sound. And worst of all, it almost never showed up at the meal itself, where somebody might have had a chance to notice it. It showed up later, sometimes days later, and that delay is exactly what made it so hard to see. Here is the problem our ancestors were up against, and it is a genuinely hard one. How do you learn that something is good for you when the payoff is a thing that does not happen? Every reward from a moment ago was easy to spot because it was an event. You smell the meat. You taste the fat. You feel full. Something happens, and you notice it. But safety is not an event. Safety is the absence of one. It is the stomach ache that never comes. The fever that never starts. The long, sick, miserable night the whole group somehow skips. How do you notice nothing? That was the wall. And getting over it came down to the one thing these people were genuinely great at. Even without science, even without writing, even without the faintest idea that germs existed, they were world-class at watching what happened next. But watching what happened next only works when next comes quickly. And that was the cruel part of food. When bad food makes you sick, it usually does not do it right away. It takes hours. Sometimes it takes days. So the sickness and the meal that caused it drift apart in time. And the link between them goes blurry. You ate a dozen things yesterday. You feel awful today. Which one did it? By the time your body reacts, the trail has gone cold. That delay is why the pattern was so faint. One meal could never teach it. It only came into focus slowly, sharpening across countless meals and countless people over a very long stretch of time. Let me show you what that slow focus actually looked like. Not one dramatic story. 3 small, ordinary situations. The kind that played out thousands of times over. First, a group catches fish and eats some fresh right away. And everyone is fine. Another batch sits out through a warm day before anyone gets to it. The people who eat that older batch raw get sick. Some of the same fish, thrown on the fire and cooked through. Causes no trouble at all. Now, this did not happen every single time. Sometimes the raw fish was fine. Sometimes the cooked fish still left someone queasy. That is what made it so hard to read. The link was real, but it was fuzzy, buried under noise. Only after the same rough pattern repeated enough times. Across enough seasons, did a faint rule start to lift out of the fog. The fire seemed to help. Second, Fresh food does not stay fresh. A hunt feeds a group for a while, but time is always working against the meat. And out ahead of them is the point where it turns and can no longer be eaten. Fire changed that race. Cooking a fresh kill knocked down a lot of what raw flesh carried, and it bought a little more time before the meat went bad. Now, fire had its limits, and this matters. It could not rescue food that had already spoiled. Once meat was truly gone, no amount of heat brought it back, and some of what made it dangerous by then could not be undone at all. But used early on food, still good enough to eat. Fire tilted the odds. It was the difference between a kill that fed people and a kill that was lost to rot before they finished it. Third, and this one may have spoken loudest, the food that went to the little ones and the frail ones, the most vulnerable people in a group react the hardest to whatever they eat. When the soft, cooked food went to the child and the sick elder, any difference in how they did was easier to see, simply because they had the least room to spare. Their bodies could turn a faint signal into a loud one. Good outcomes for the weakest members were a clue the whole group could read. And this is the heart of the entire story. So here it is plainly. They never discovered bacteria. They discovered that some meals ended differently. That is the whole thing. They were not fighting an enemy they could name. They were noticing, dimly, across generations, that certain ways of handling food led to fewer bad nights. They could not have told you why. They just slowly built up a feel for which meals were trouble and which ones were safe. The same way you build up a feel for which street not to walk down after dark without ever being able to prove it. Now, one thing has to stay honest here, because it matters. We cannot dig up a stomachache. Nothing in the bones and ash proves that the people who cooked their food actually got sick less often. That evidence does not survive. What modern science can tell us is that heat truly does destroy a great many of the things in food that make us ill. The protection was real. The killer was real. So there was a genuine force working quietly under the surface, rewarding the groups that cooked and punishing the ones that did not. Whether or not a single human being ever understood it was there. But a lesson this faint, learned this slowly, was more than any one person was ever going to crack alone. Seeing it took something bigger than a single life. It took the one thing that could gather clues across the years and carry them forward. It took generations. So how does a blurry hunch spread thin across a whole group ever harden into something solid? How does maybe the fire helps turn into just the way things are done? Picture an old woman by a fire, years down the line. A child reaches for a piece of raw fish, and without even thinking about it, she stops him. Not that one. She says, "Put it on the coals first." The boy asks why. And here is the thing. She does not really know why. She could not tell him about bacteria or parasites or spoilage, because none of those words or ideas exist yet. All she has is a memory. A season a few years back when people ate fish that had sat out too long. And some of them got badly sick. And one of them did not get up again. She remembers that the ones who cooked it were fine. That is all she has. And that is enough. Not that one. Cook it first. That right there is how the knowledge moved. Not through understanding, through memory. And Abbott, and 100 small corrections passed from one person to the next. A child watches an adult and copies what they do. A young hunter eats something that turns his stomach, remembers it, and does it differently next time. An old woman who has seen more meals than anyone steers the young away from the ones that once brought trouble. Nobody writes any of it down. Nobody has to. The knowledge lives in hands and habits and warnings, handed along and nudged a little straighter each time it moves. And a practice like this survives for a beautifully simple reason. The groups that did it tended to do better. Fewer of their people were lost to a bad meal. More of their children could eat what their small bodies could handle. Over enough time, the habit spread. Not because anyone proved it was right, but because the people who followed it were more likely to still be around to pass it on. Which leads to the strangest and most human part of all of this. The rule can outlive the reason for it. A custom like "do not eat that raw" can travel down through hundreds of generations as pure habit, as a story, as something that just feels wrong to do. Long after every memory of why has faded away, people did not need to understand the enemy to defend against it. They only had to remember the rule. The reason could vanish completely, and the protection would still hold, carried forward in a habit whose origin no one alive could name. Which brings us all the way back to that little fish tooth in Israel. It cannot tell us who first understood the pattern. It never could. That person is invisible to us, lost on the far side of 800,000 years. But the tooth tells us something almost better. It tells us that by that point, so deep in the past, it barely feels real. Somebody already knew enough to control the heat, enough to choose the fish, enough to do it again and again, and to hand what they knew to whoever came next. The insight itself did not survive. The habit did. And the habit is the proof that the insight was already there. Go back one last time to that woman by the fire. She takes the fish off the coals, the flesh falling soft from the bone, and she breaks off a piece and hands it to the boy. She has no idea what she just did for him. She cannot see the invisible thing the fire killed. She does not know there is anything to see. She only knows this is the right way to do it, the way it has always been done, the way she will teach him to do it too. And that was enough. It was always enough. Cooking did not begin when humans understood germs. It began when they got so good at noticing what happened next that understanding the invisible stopped being necessary at all. They could not see the enemy. They never needed to. They just had to remember the fire.